Good afternoon, everyone, and for our presenter today, good evening. And welcome to a Nonprofit Hub Hubinar. I'm your host today, Randy Hawthorne, the executive editor here at Nonprofit Hub. Happy to be bringing you yet another fact-filled, fun-filled presentation. And I have with me today Tara Todras, and she is in Istanbul. Not Constantinople. Sorry, I had to do it, Tara. How are you today?
Yeah, all good. For those They Might Be Giants out fans, it's well known.
Like I was saying, I had a short affair with that band in college, and really, music is so fun. But I am super excited to hear more about visual storytelling, and I know that we're going to have some great visuals today. So I'm going to hand it on over to you, and I'll come back at the end for any questions that you might have. And just know, everyone, please just know, we are recording this. We will be recording this presentation, and it will be available for you to watch. So here you go, Tara, it's all you.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here with you guys tonight or today in whatever area in the world you are. And yeah, I'm just really excited to do this hour with you and help you as nonprofits become visual storytellers. So just to begin, this is me, and I'm a visual storyteller and communications consultant. I have been working in the field for over 15 years, but I'm originally from New York City, and I'm based in Istanbul, as Randy said. And as a visual storyteller, I've had my photos featured in over 20 front pages of the New York Times, which is a great honor for me. And typically I travel a lot. As not with the pandemic, I've been working and doing lots of workshops on and consulting on visual storytelling. I also founded and ran a creative agency for 6 years, working with the top news organizations and nonprofits in the world. And we did a lot of amazing in-depth interactives with different kind of UNICEF, IRC, HRW, Human Rights Watch, excuse me, the World Bank and other places like that. And we really love taking dense reports and helping humanize them. So we got very good at telling the human story with data. And then since last year, I added a new service line to my business where I've been training social impact organizations on how to become better storytellers. So whereas before, I think a lot of organizations had this nice to have, this was something that they could do for their organization. Now with the pandemic, it's really become a need to have. So I'm really excited that all of you guys are here joining me, and I really want to help you in any way to become better at doing this. And I realize no one is going to come out of this a photojournalist or videographer, but that's not the point. You can still tell your story very effectively and do a lot with what working with very basic tools, even if you don't have a lot. So like I said, inside each of us, this is a quote of a natural born storyteller waiting to be released. I really believe this because it's really one of those things that we know a good story when we see it. We all understand that. So I think that just a matter of how to figure out how we can then become the storytellers ourselves. And that's what we're here for. So here's like what we're going to talk about. So 3 questions to ask before finding visuals. So we need to figure out like kind of starting at the end and working backwards. I always like to think of it as a choose your own adventure book, where you go and read the end, and then you go back to find what you need for your visuals. Then what is visual storytelling? Because although that seems kind of obvious, it's a lot of other things that you may not have considered. So to give you more options. Then I want to talk about the old versus new ways of telling stories in terms of nonprofits, like what had been done before and now like what we need to do. Then we'll go through a couple of good photo basics, some good video basics, and then some quick tips for upping your storytelling game. So that's where we're starting with the 3 questions. So first question is, who is your audience? And for me, this is very important because like when I had my creative agency, a lot of times clients would come to us and say, oh, we really want to do something very cool and maybe like VR or, augmented reality. And you'd be like, yeah, that's awesome. Who are you trying to reach? Who's your audience? And then the answer might be something like, oh, well, we're trying to reach like remote populations in Kenya or refugees. And then you have to say, well, then VR may not be the thing that you want to do because they may not have access to the most high-speed internet or technology to do that. So it's important to consider your audience when we're doing this. So when we're talking about this, and the first thing that I think is really important to talk about is to audit your social media to find out about your existing audience. And this you could do also through your best posts. You can look at your social media and analytics, your Facebook audience insights, Instagram, Twitter, both have great insights, and you could find out a lot through that. And you can also find out a lot through the posts, which posts did the best on your site so far. And you can really understand more about your audience using those tools. Then once you have that, you want to think about creating your ideal super fan or the person who's going to be so happy to be in like seeing your work that they're going to want to share and spread and donate and activate whatever it is that you want from your audience. So if you go through and you talk to, figure out the ages, the age, the location, the language, the spending power, the interests, their challenges, and even their stage of life, all of these things will help you to focus on which social media platforms or platforms you should be talking to them. And that will also help you define your visuals because each platform is going to be different in terms of what visuals you want to use. So like everything like in this, you really just can go into as much depth as possible to create this ideal superfan. And then, finding out where your audience is, where they have spending their time. If they're spending their time mostly on Facebook, then that will help you decide where you're going to go as Facebook. It also will be like, let's say if you're looking for an older donor base, that would probably be a Facebook audience. Whereas if you're looking to activate younger audiences, then maybe it's Instagram or TikTok. So it's really very dependent on like where your audience is spending your time. And then again, this will all help you because like in the end, these kind of visual storytelling, it's much better to focus on one part of it and get it really right and then be able to expand it rather than being overwhelmed by all these different pieces. So if you're able to just focus in on one part, one ideal superfan and your target audience, this is a great place to start. So the second question to ask is, what is your goal? So this is, what is your goal in terms of, what's your focus like for your organization? Are you trying to increase awareness? Are you trying to raise money? Is this for a specific campaign or is this an overall thing? Are you looking to target a small group, of your clients? Or are you looking to really expand it? So you want to try to do this and with as much focus as possible. And then also, what are you trying to accomplish? Your goal should be attainable and relevant. And that's incredibly important to that because it's not just about you, it's about your audience and the community that you're advocating for. Sorry, there shouldn't be, it's which community you're advocating for. So like you want to consider those kind of things when you're defining your goal. And also when you're doing this, like what is your unique approach as an organization for this? Because almost every organization has an amazing set of people that they're helping or clients that they're working with. Like, for example, when I worked for Girl Effect earlier this year, and they had this amazing program called Tech Enabled Girl Ambassadors. And they had all this amazing videos from women, girls, and young adults, young women around the world, and who were talking about their experiences during the pandemic. So that's like part that you can use to defining your goal, is like how your approach and what you can use within your organization can help you define what's the best kind of goal that will be unique to you and to your visuals. And then finally, how do you measure the success of your goals? You need to think about key performance indicators, KPIs, so you can think about, like, do I want more shares, likes, website visits, donations? Are you looking, those kind of things. And so you need to be able to be more specific about it as possible and measurable, so that you can always iterate on those kinds of, you can try an A/B testing and do that kind of thing. The third question to ask is also, what is your call to action? And so the point of this is that these all go together. And so your goal is to helping guide to your call to action. You want something that is simple and evokes emotion and is very direct. So this kind of things, especially right now, is incredibly important to just be as concise as possible and to evoke emotion. So you want to be very specific. A great example of this is I was on God's Love We Deliver. I saw on their Facebook page recently, they had something where they were talking about their recipients' stories, and then said they needed 4 microwaves to give to their recipients so that they could heat up the food that they were sending them, because otherwise they couldn't actually eat the food. And it was fantastic because it was such a simple and effective call to action, because they, just said, okay, that we just need these 4 microwaves, and everyone jumped on it because it was just so easy to do. So this is why it's very specific and very concise, and it makes people feel good. So it's inspiring. And so that's like really important in terms of like, what it is that's going to inspire action. So your language is very important here with your visuals, and both of them just have to be very clear and to the point. And also like questioning what are any obstacles for them to get involved. That's also incredibly important. It's like, consider what it is that they have to get over to a hurdle for that. That's kind of the things that you want to think about in terms of inspiring action. But also with visuals, you want to consider, like, when you're doing this, like what it is that has changed in terms of people's ideas. So if you're inspiring someone, they're also like, they see themselves, but they also see something new. So if we're talking about like a dad who goes to work, but also is like the cook of a family and knits, these are like an old versus new way of seeing like the old stereotypes. So it's kind of making people relate, but also then giving them something new to think about. So it's like, it's unique and it catches them. So on to the next topic, which is what is visual storytelling? And so this is seems obvious, I know, but in fact, yes, it is photos and video, and that's typically what people think of when they think of visual storytelling. But it's also data visualization, animations, microsites. It's everything in terms of what could be considered an online way to tell your story, because a lot of times with nonprofits specifically, there may not be photos and video depending on the types of populations of people you're working with, if they're vulnerable populations, or maybe it's just not it doesn't seem like it's a people-centric, stories. There's lots of ways to take, your stories and make them illustrated with other types of storytelling. So these are some really great things to consider. And then also things that we don't think about, but of course are social media platforms are incredibly visual. Like we obviously all are responding to visuals every single second. Blogs on our websites are very visual, and newsletters and press releases as well. They all benefit from having visual storytelling. So these are all things that go under the ecosystem of visual storytelling and that are really, something to consider when you're just saying, well, I don't take photos or video. There's a lot more out there that falls under this. So why do we connect with stories? So in terms of our brain, a story activates our brain and it allows us to interact to the listener to make their own story out of what's being said. So if I'm telling you a story, a lot of times the reaction of someone else is to think of their own story that relates to that. So that brings you in. And also when you're listening to a story, you're mirroring each other. And so you're really you're connecting emotionally through that. And then of course, the brain is releasing its chemical dopamine into the system that also like gives you that emotion of an event, but also makes it easier to remember because we are people that remember stories. So like when we're processing facts, we only use two parts of the brain, but when we have a well-told story, we also our entire brain gets activated for it. So that's really important. And so then that's why we connect to stories, but why do we connect to visuals? So when we have information, 90% of the information we absorb is visual. So it's like, we owe in our heads and everything like that, we have the other senses, that's about 10%. But if we're doing visuals, then it's 90%. And so that's something that you have to think about. And then visuals are processed. 60,000 times faster in the brain. So that's like when we're talking about things that we're doing as a storyteller, if we're using visuals, that is incredibly helpful to know that we're doing that. And then also if we're watching a video, we'll watch that 80% more than we will, but only 20% will read the text on a page. Okay, and so then part of visual storytelling is authenticity, and that's been something that has become more and more important these days as we're trying to, stay connected online. It is something that we're all dealing with. We have so much information out there, and we are immersed with content. It's how we relate, with all this content is that we need to find things that we're emotionally attached to. And so if we have this content overload, the things that will stick out are the things that we're emotionally attached to. Oh, shoot. Sorry. I hope no one else can hear that. Sorry, a ring went off on my phone. I apologize for that if anyone heard it. Oh, good. Just internally. Thank you for that, Randy. So in terms of like the authenticity, that's incredibly important. And so that leads directly into first person stories. So first person stories, like we these days, with our user generated content, when the age of the selfie, this is the authenticity that we're talking about because people are out there telling their own stories every single moment of every single day. And so it doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, these pictures probably shouldn't be perfect because like the airbrush isn't going to sit as well with people. So, the human experience is what is most important. And so if you're out there in this, the intimacy of these personal stories, that's what we need to That's what we need to focus on. So when we have the first person stories, it's we're putting the audience inside the story. You are got all the senses right there. So if you have a first person account, like you're going in and seeing the day of someone and understanding their lives, you are in there with your sound, your smell, your taste, and your touch. So like all these things get evoked by a visual story. And so first person, when you're there, that's really like once you get inside a story, then everything else comes, because then it creates a strong sense of empathy. They're in there and the connection is sealed. So I cannot stress enough how important first person stories are right now. This is something that I think we have seen as a shift as well, and we'll get to that later. But I think that in terms of like the booming narrator voice, the people that are telling us things from above and we hear them come in, no longer is what people need. They need to see, they need to feel related one-to-one, and especially right now when we're trying so hard to find those connections online, that we will just be drawn to those. So that leads into my next topic, which is the old versus new ways of telling stories. So in the past with NGOs, we were really focused on like isn't this horrible, like the child with the flies or things going wrong. And I am not putting that down, and there's still a lot of things out there that need support, that are horrible issues, but there are ways to deal with it where you are also, putting the subjects in where they really feel like the subjects are empowered. So at the end of the day, there's been a lot of research that says images of tragedy will still evoke donor support, but the problem is that people won't then share it. And in our new world of wanting to get people to be our super fans and those that are going to be really care about our organization, you want them to feel empowered. So it's just about like empowering the subjects and empowering the audience through our visuals. For example, I did a project with the International Rescue Committee where we were trying to figure out new ways to talk about the Syrian crisis on year 7, of like what was happening, because we still wanted people to relate. So we did this project about what are your dreams, and we put people on a black background so you couldn't tell where they were, and we just talked about what are your dreams. And inevitably, all of our dreams are the same. Like people wanted a safer place for their children to grow up, and for them to have education, and for them to, for them to feel like they could go to the grocery store and not get attacked by a missile. I mean, these are things that are like the obvious care of your family was so universal that it just hit every single emotion, and it was beautiful, and it was just their words, and it was not no one was speaking over them. It was just very simply the refugees first person accounts, and it was incredibly impactful. Also, with the old versus new ways of telling stories, we have to consider how our audiences have changed, because this is, as we were talking about before, who our audiences are, but it's also like all these things about them have changed. Before, a lot of times it was offline. Our audiences might have been at a gala. They might have been at an event. And now, at least for right now, everything for the most part is online. So our audiences have changed, and we have to consider that when we're thinking about the stories that we're telling and how we're telling them. They've also become more influential in terms of they're the ones that are kind of driving the bus. Before it was that we were telling them, but now they have so many more devices. They can decide anything that they want, where they want, and you can't sit someone in a chair and make them watch a 10-minute video. They just won't. They'll flip it off. if it's not interesting. So we have to consider like this kind of stuff when we're doing, and so they have the increased control. So we have to make our visual stories be more in something that they care about. Also, because they have more autonomy, that's like they're very it's very important to realize that, and that this is all those things that we need to consider when we're out there and taking our visuals and realizing that we can't just have someone sit in a chair and watch a slideshow. So we have to make sure that everything is impactful. Also, it's about how we're measuring the reach and engagement. So before, again, we would measure it in very different ways when it was offline, but now we're really seeing how our audiences have changed, and we're measuring how we're engaging with them in very different ways. So how we've reached people has changed, right? We have social media, all these social media. So for example, Facebook posts with visual content receive 40% more engagement. Twitter videos 6 times more likely to be retweeted than photos. YouTube, 6 billion hours of video are viewed every month. And then Instagram, photos with faces get 38% more likes. So these are the things that we're thinking about when we're thinking about how our audience is interacting with our visuals. And we also have to reach how we reach people has changed, right? So that's, again, the instant communication, social media, we're out there every day telling our stories, whereas before, we would have someone go out in the field and take some pictures or take some video, and then maybe that would be a campaign that would happen every couple of months, maybe every 6 months. We don't do that anymore. We are talking to people every day. So we need to find how we can engage people on these platforms daily, so that we can still be connected with them when they have so much possibility of who to talk to out there. So, and also we have now a much wider reach with them. And this is also about we're creating targeted content, because before maybe we didn't have such focus groups. But as I was saying in the beginning, when we look at our insights of our audience, we can really create very targeted content for all of our audiences, which is amazing. It's also a little overwhelming, but it's great, and we have this data that we can use, and if we figure out how, it's an incredibly powerful tool. And then the other thing is that our audiences, in terms of how we reach people, is that they want more transparency about how things are done. They want to see, they want to see where their money is going. They want to see how things are going with organizations. They want to feel connected to the values of an organization. So all of this stuff is also very important to communicate in a very different way than we did before. Okay, so we've gone through all the things about just the things that you should consider as you're creating this, and I wanted to also run through some photo basics for you guys so that you could think about this stuff. And as I said before, this is not things that I think that everyone's going to come out of this being a photojournalist or whatever, but we don't need that these days. Just think of this as a good exercise. If you find a picture that you like, try to deconstruct it. Try to imagine what different demographics would think about when they look at an image, so that you can see what your viewers would relate to. Just write it down. It's really a simple exercise, but it'll help you kind of define why you think, in terms of how an image has succeeded or not, what it is that is helpful in that image. So it'll help start defining your eye for photos. So first, the first thing, I'm going to give you guys some good tips, and what I would suggest here is that if you feel overwhelmed by this, just try one. And during the time that you're doing this, don't try to do everything, because it'll get overwhelming like everything else. I would try to stay very specific and try to just focus on one of these tips and things like this that I'm going to show you. And then once you feel like you are getting it, you can try adding more of them. So rule of thirds. When we're looking at photos, a lot of times, we don't think about it, but a good photo will work on the rule of thirds where there is someone in one of the thirds of the frame. And this is very important to drawing us in. Like if someone is just very standard in the middle of a frame, then it doesn't really pull us in the same way as something that's kind of on the edges and other elements can like draw our eye into the frame. So that's a very good thing to consider, and not hard in terms of when you're taking the photos. Just try different ways if you're not sure. Just move your camera, and it's just a learning process with this. Also, when you're talking about pictures, something that doesn't really get considered as much is lighting. And lighting is very important to evoking emotion. And if you're using lighting that is dark, then it's, when it's like very emotional, then that may be good for something that's sad. But then if you're thinking about something that's happier, then nice light at a sunrise or a sunset, where the light is very soft, can be very good in terms of that, when you're doing those kind of things. Also your subject matter. Obviously, you know what your subject is when you're taking a photo, but consider the other things in a frame that you're adding to and not subtracting. Like that it's like something that's not distracting you from the photo, but bringing you in. Same thing with focus. Like if you're doing something, then your focus should be, consider like what your depth of field is. If you're using something that's a soft focus, then you're going to have a focus that's very present, but maybe you want something where everything is in focus. Also, the decisive moment. Now, I don't know if you guys know this picture, but this is by a very famous photographer called Henri Cartier-Bresson. And he talked extensively about the decisive moment. And this picture is very famous for that because people say, oh, well, that's a decisive moment. But the thing about this picture that people don't really tend to know is that Henri Cartier-Bresson stood for hours in this spot to get this photo. So even though this is a decisive moment, it is not the decisive moment. Decisive moments don't have to be like, oh, I missed that shot, shoot, I can't do it. There's always something else that you could do. It's about holding tension. So if someone is talking during a lecture and their hand is raised and they're doing something, that's a decisive moment, as opposed to when their hands are down, they're not talking and nothing is happening. That may not be as interesting depending on the situation. So when you're doing this, consider that your decisive moment can be a lot of things, and just take a lot of different pictures. Like don't just stop. I mean, for me, when I'm out in the field, I can take anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 photos during an assignment. And obviously people aren't going to do that. But what I'm saying is that even as a professional, you take a lot of footage. So don't think that you have to just do it once. Consider that you can just keep trying and iterating and seeing what it is, and never be, they'll be like, okay, I got the shot, let's go home. Always try for more, because you never know when you get home which shot you'll actually like. Okay, so video basics. Just gonna run through these very quickly as well. So with the video basics now, we have the idea of horizontal or vertical. And so, typically when we're taking video, we do horizontal, but now we have different formats. So you have to think about where you're going to be doing it. And if you're going to be doing, let's say, a normal typical video, plus you're going to be doing an Instagram story, do you want to also have two, like you want to have your phone doing video plus a video camera? And these are the things that you're going to have to think about in terms of like which way you're going to shoot stuff. Always use a tripod if you can. If you can't, then try to keep things steady. Use your arms or elbows as a tripod on your body, because the more shake you have in a video, the less people will be able to pay attention. Create a shot list. That's also very important beforehand. So you're thinking about the stuff before you go out in the field. And then you want to like vary your shots. Part of what I was saying about the photos is like you vary your shots. So you're not just taking one shot and then leaving it, and then you hold it. So you want to hold each shot, especially for B-roll, for at least 10 seconds. You know, and then how you're going to edit this, you want to think about the stuff before you go out, because you want to think about it, you know, you don't want to come back and wish you had gotten something that you need for an edit. So you want to have that as part of your, you know, creation process beforehand, is how you're thinking about your edit. Even if it doesn't turn out that way, it's a very helpful thought process to go through for that. And then finally, and most important, also very important, is you want to invest in good audio. Audio cannot be understated in terms of what is important for video. If you do not have good audio, you do not have good video. So in terms of giving you guys some tips for upping your storytelling game, I wanted to just give you something that you could take with you today and use immediately. So what I was saying before about making a shot list, this is part of it. Before creating a story, make a list of what you want. And that means like, what is your ideal, you know, if you're gonna be following someone, like for example, on the right, this is a story in Nepal about abortion rights. And this woman was, you know, had decided not to have an abortion and was had a child. And I followed her for a day to see what her life was like. And she went and fed the chickens, and, you know, she was playing with her son and all these things that are like a daily life. But in terms of like creating the list beforehand, if you know who you're going to shoot, try to create the most like detailed list of what you want from a story, because then when you're out in the field, you can just look at it instead of trying to remember it later and be like, oh, I meant to get that shot and I didn't. But if you write them all down beforehand, then when you're creating a story, it's not something you have to think of, it's just something you have to look at. So this all goes back to the authenticity. So when you're trying to find a story, you need to be raw. Right now, I think in our world that we're living in, you know, all of our emotions are so close to the surface. We are raw. We are living in a raw time. People have no patience for something that is disingenuous. So when you're looking for your stories, make sure that you find that personal narrative. And I know that sometimes it's not that easy to do, but this is the kind of stuff that, you know, you have to consider. And I mean, I'm giving you a lot of like these things. I go into a lot more detail when I'm doing workshops, because I want to help you figure out how to find these personal narratives and be able to use these tools. But you know, I want to also like let you try to do this with these kind of quick hits. So if you try to be raw, consider how you're feeling and how you would relate to these stories, because right now we're all going through the same things. So it's a really valuable time for us to like look in ourselves and see what we would relate to, and then that can help us find the personal narratives that will make an emotional connection. And then, so when you're creating the story and you have your most impactful visuals, this is also very important. When you have the things, when you come back from the field, or whomever has created the visuals, doesn't have to be you, if you've asked someone on your team, or because you can't go out, the person in the field that's getting these things for you, don't try to create a story around everything. You don't have to, our audiences these days are way more discerning than we give them credit for. So if you don't have to guide them with every single step of the process, if you have 3 impactful visuals, don't use 10. Use those 3 and build your story around that, because that's what people are going to pay attention to, not the other 7. So it's just very important to think about that when you have it back. And if you are the person that created those visuals, and I can tell you from experience, it's very hard to set your emotions aside if you really like a photo, but it's not your best photo. So you might need some external help for someone to come in and tell you what is your best photo, or what is your best video, because you may, as the creator, be too attached and need someone to like pull pull you away from that. The final thing I'd say is that when you're doing this, consider how you can reuse the content. So if you're going out in the field for a specific story, or you're getting content for a specific story, if you give yourself enough time to think about this, this will be very helpful down the road. You want to think about other uses for this content that may be helpful later, evergreen content, as I like to call it. And so it's like, I think that that'll be very important for you, and something, again, that when I'm helping people in the workshops consider how to put this into their workflow, this is something we talk about a lot, because you don't just want something that's a one-off. You want to be able to find content that is going to be helpful again and again and again. So putting this in and thinking about how you can reuse the content, that's very important. So I hope this has been helpful. Obviously, there's been a lot of things that I've gone to in very quickly, and I could spend hours on each of them in depth. But since we only have an hour, and I wanted to give you guys time to ask questions, so I just powered through it. But I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you have.
Oh, you're getting a lot of great feedback. So you resonated, which is awesome. And I knew that the presentation was going to look beautiful. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
You mentioned that what formats work best on different platforms. What about email marketing? Do you have any experience in that?
Yeah, I think with email marketing, you want to have, well, firstly, I think you're looking into, the content, it tends to be horizontal, but that doesn't necessarily have to really be those days. I've seen some amazing email marketing that has like a beautiful vertical, and is just the vertical image, not anything like, because the horizontal doesn't fill our page in the same way when you're scrolling that a vertical does. So there's some very smart things to be considered for vertical. So actually, I think you really can use both. It's just a matter of, how much your audience engages with the content, because also you don't want 10 images and then them not to load correctly. So you just have to be very careful about that. But I don't think that you need to overload more than one or two, as long as they are something that really grasps people's attention immediately. But I think vertical photos have been completely undervalued. And I also think that using video is one of those things in email marketing that is also very valuable, because people click on video clips so much more. But the interesting thing is you have to make it look like a video clip. You can't just like, you want the hit like look like it has a play button on it, so someone thinks they can just play it immediately, even if it takes them to another site. That it's something that is, it's kind of a little bit of a deception, but then they actually will spend time on it.
All right. Any thoughts on black and white versus color in photos or videos?
Yeah, so I think that it really depends on what your focus is. So for example, I did a story for the New York Times on Ebola survivors in Sierra Leone. And the story was about this football club that had started because this one man had lost just a horrible, he had lost 40 members of his family to Ebola. And he wanted to start this football club so that he could bring the community together and support the survivors, because there was a lot of stigma around Ebola survivors. So when I went to shoot this, it was the middle of the day, but it ended up that we didn't actually end up shooting it till the end of the day. And the photos that the colors that they're wearing are yellow and black. And it felt very distracting to me to keep it in color, because I didn't want that to be the focus. I wanted the focus to be on what was happening. So I converted it to black and white, and it ended up winning a World Press Photo Award for that content. And I think it's just very important to consider what the color is doing for you. I don't think that it's, if just turning it to black and white isn't necessary most of the time if there isn't a real reason for it. But sometimes color can be incredibly distracting. So you want to be able to focus on if there are a lot of really good dynamic moments and harsh angles, that can lead itself to a very, very impactful black and white story.
All right. We have a question here about, so they're a food bank, they can't shoot any of their clients for privacy reasons. Should stock photos ever be used, or do they cheapen your appeal?
So when you have a food bank, firstly, let me just say that there's always a way to tell your personal stories. And obviously you don't want to, I work a lot with vulnerable populations, and I recognize that there are a lot of limitations to taking photos and video, but you don't have to just take photos and videos. There's a lot of different ways to think about it. So I will address the stock thing in a second, but I just want to go back to thinking about outside the box in terms of your own story. There's ways to do it, firstly with illustrations and animations where you're telling people's stories, but you don't have their faces, because that's not, you've anonymized that. There's also something to consider is telling the stories through the people who are working there and how they've been affected by what is happening at the food bank, because their interactions are also really important, obviously, to the people that you're serving. So I think that or in the community, like how that's affected people in the community. So there's an ecosystem of stories that you can consider that aren't about the actual recipients of the food bank, or the way that you tell their stories through, animations or illustrations or things like that. So we've had a lot of success doing those kind of things when I'm working with vulnerable populations. In terms of the stock photos, yes, I would be careful, because there's a lot of times where they're not really they're not really in line with what you are saying. So just obviously sometimes it's necessary to use stock photos, but then I would make them more of an intimate photo, like people's hands or on food or something like that, rather than having it be, trying to explain more about the situation, but just kind of giving people a tiny piece of it, rather than trying to make, trying to find a stock photo that's going to exactly be what you are, because that's not possible.
Yeah, and if you're going to shoot hands or food, why not shoot your own hands or food?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot to, that's another thing, is like sometimes with those situations with vulnerable populations, a lot of times there's ways to just use the silhouettes of people, even if, they feel comfortable being shot from behind, or, like this kind of stuff. There are ways to do it. It just depends on how comfortable your subjects are. And like you said, like even if it's just your hands on food, like, yeah, take the employees of the food bank and do that. I'm sure you have some great stuff that you can, do some really interesting shots with. So why not just make it yours?
how do you decide if a story is authentic?
I think it's something that I think we know now that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of fake news out there, right? So what I'm not saying is like we can always spot fake news, but we can understand when someone is being disingenuous. Like when we feel like something is like, when we have a CEO talking to us or a narrator, a booming narrator voice, that doesn't sit very well with us anymore. So what I'm saying in terms of authenticity is like when it's a real person's story. So we know when we look online, I'm sure it's happened to every single person here where you feel connected to someone's story because it's authentic, because you're relating to something directly in that story. The next time it happens, or if you can go back to the content that you remember, try to pinpoint what it is in that content. And that will help you understand what you're seeing that you're connecting to. And that is the authentic part that I'm talking about. Because obviously, like, I'm not saying that we can all spot fake news and things like this, but what I'm saying is that when someone has a story that we relate to, then that's the authenticity we're looking for.
All right. Can you please speak to the importance of a pre-interview and doing research before ever going out for the shoot in the field?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. So, when you're going, especially when you're considering, I mean, I work a lot in post-conflict areas, places that have a lot of tension or things like that. So I'm very familiar with this, but it also works in all different types of contexts. You want to do research with people. If you are not from that area, then you need to create a team of the people who are, because the thing that you want is your knowledge that you trust. And so I always start with, creating the people that are on the ground that I can like talk to and really understand what's going on and get a really good lay of the land and what's okay and what isn't. And so, starting with that as a good research point, and then, thinking about security and, so not just security for yourself, but security for your subjects, for the, everything that you're doing, and just making sure that, you're going to be going into a situation that isn't going to put anyone else in harm's way. Is very important. So when you're doing this research, like reaching out, because I come from a journalist background, and I reach out to everyone across the board. I reach out to journalists, I reach out to other NGOs, I do a lot of research before I do a subject, go and do them, because I want to make sure that I fully understand as much as I can. So, I find people very, very helpful when it comes to sharing their knowledge about these kind of things and like understanding more. So never be afraid to ask people, especially, even if you're not come from a journalist background. If you ask journalists who's like, let's say, has just been to Mali, and you send them a DM tweet, chances are they will respond because they care about where they've been and they care to make sure that you're doing the story right.
Awesome. Yeah, I agreed, Tara, that we would have a good conversation. So let's definitely connect after this.
Okay, cool.
Let's see. Do you recommend any resources that make those classic text overlay marketing videos using images and short clips?
I'm not sure I understand that.
Yeah, I was trying to use good inflection. Any resources to make classic text overlay marketing videos using images and short clips? So it's a tool. Do you know of any
Tool.
tools online, like an app or something that would be
Oh
able
yeah,
to
sure.
help?
So I highly recommend Adobe Suite. That's my go-to. Spark has, there's a lot of different things that you can use in terms of Spark posts, Spark video. that you can use. If you're looking for photo overlay, Canva is great. And also, I mean, I use Photoshop for everything photos, but if you're just starting out on this, and you're a Mac user, iMovie is also very easy to do overlays with text. If you're a little bit more advanced, Premiere is very good, and also has an app on the phone that is not terribly hard to understand. So that's what I would go to is the Adobe suite, and you know, it takes a little bit to understand it, but once you do, it's very easy to implement.
Okay, let's see. I think we'll try. Do you have any recommendations for crowdfunding? Like, kind of like you were doing for email?
Crowdfunding for
Yeah, I'm
visuals?
guessing, my guess is like, personally, I think I would answer this. It probably works a lot like many of the other platforms in the sense that crowdfunding, in most cases that I've seen, as far as the platforms are being used, is pretty horizontal.
Right. Well,
Um,
also, like, it's also going back to what I was saying, it's all about the personal story.
yeah,
I mean, when you're crowdfunding, it's about, I mean, your organization or you or whomever it is for, the more personal you can make it, the more that will resonate with your audience. So you really need to make sure that it's all about, you know, and when you're talking, like, you want to, if you can, the most impactful crowdsourcing videos I've seen is not just someone talking to the camera, but also being able to add in some, you know, visuals from other things. So it's not just, you know, 2 to 3 minutes of you talking to the camera, but there's something also that engages someone past the first 10 seconds when you're doing that.
so a lot of blogs tend to be like word heavy, content heavy.
Yes.
Any tips on making it more visually appealing?
Yes, I would say that you want to put in, typically, like, the blogs that I find that are like much more appealing visually have a photo pretty high up. It's maybe not the first thing, but you know how typically a lot of blogs will have a photo as the headline, but then it's like just blocks and blocks and blocks of text after that. I would put like you know, you want to make sure that on one screen someone has text, but they also have a visual. So if you're looking at the first screen and you have text, make sure there's something that will make them want to scroll. So to make sure that you have a visual that is one of your best in terms of engaging the audience high up, and then you can put others after. You know, so like if you don't have those visuals, consider, you know, at that point you can, like, there are like stock, you know, there's other ways to do it with vector illustrations or things like this that don't have to be as exact, but will just keep the eye moving down the page. So you definitely want people to have a different layout as they move down. So when I'm doing blog posts, I always try to make sure that there's first like a photo pretty high up so that they start and they see it. But then as they scroll down, maybe there's a block of text, but then it's broken up by color blocks as well. So that's a visual that you don't always have to have something, but it's something that will keep them, you know, just their eyes from unfocusing on your content. And then, you know, I also really recommend having a video about halfway down if it's not higher up, because then that also will keep people engaged in the content. Like I said, things that have video, people are much more likely to watch and retain than if they just have a photo.
Cool. Well, this is the last question. So telling a visually interesting story, there are so many channels. Which do you strategically recommend people should focus on?
Well, I strategically suggest, like, when you figure out who your audience is, that you, like, if it's one channel like Facebook, then you just do Facebook first. If you don't have more than like an hour a week to deal with this, then you only want to have one platform that you're doing. And so that's just about like what is possible for each. And I mean, as a visual storyteller, for me personally, I focus on Instagram, but as a workshop coach, I'm reaching different audiences. So I also focus on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. But I know where I get the most engagement, and then I focus on that. So I do put up posts other places, but I know from my work where I'm getting the most engagement, and I make sure to be much more consistent on that. And then as I can spend more time, then I put it on the others. But it can be completely overwhelming if you're doing every single platform to the utmost. So if it's just you, if you're a one-person show when it comes to social media, then just, focus on one or two that you can do well.
And I would concur. You need to find your audience, and sometimes that just takes some takes some practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But don't. I would say, from a social media perspective, don't focus on all of them. Like, is your donor audience really out on the old Snapchats? Probably not. So
Exactly.
just be thinking about where you think your audience might be.
Yeah, and then you
All
use
right.
the tools, you can be much more strategic to just use the things and then have a presence on all of them, but not focus on them. So you could use something like Hootsuite to just, use the social media on other ones, but not focus on more than one at a time.
Yep, I always give people, that's the first thing I do if I have to give a social media presentation, is I give you permission now to not have to worry about all of them.
Yes, that's a great line. I love that. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much, Tara. So do you go to bed now, or
Yeah, I'm gonna go to bed. I have a 1.5-year-old son, and he gets up without fail at about 7 a.m. So I get to I'm gonna
well,
jump
I
into bed now
appreciate
and
you
hope for.
I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, this is
That's a
my
fun
pleasure.
game,
I really enjoyed
so
it.
enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you guys. This is great. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'm really honored to do this. And Randy, thank you so much. This was really wonderful, and I definitely would love to connect soon with you.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Okay.
hey, thanks a lot. Good
Thank you
night.
guys. Bye-bye.